Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us Jay Hodge, who is the founder and president of Hodge Associates. Jay, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. Give me a little bit of background on yourself in a business sense and what led you to found your company, and give us a little bit of idea about what type of clients that you work with. I want to dig in deep and see what it is that you specifically do and what sets you apart from anyone else in your industry.
Sure. So my background started, I'm a farm boy from Indiana. Spent most of my high school in Indiana. I ended up as a Marine. Spent 5 years in the United States Marine Corps. And then from there, my professional growth took place through companies like Toyota, General Motors, Ford, Caterpillar, Tenet Healthcare. So I've been very, very blessed throughout my career with a lot of amazing mentors and some phenomenal leaders working for some amazing organizations. About 4 years ago, I decided to start my own company. So most of my career has been spent in operations, whether it be in manufacturing, healthcare, different organizations. But the operations is kind of my passion, and so it was kind of an interesting career development. When I went to work for Toyota, I learned the Toyota way. I learned lean principles, and the interesting thing about Toyota is they don't just teach it, they live it. And so it was a very interesting experience to actually live the lean philosophy, and it translated very well throughout my career. So 4 years ago, I started my own company as a consultant, and got a network. And we just work with organizations like hospitals, manufacturing organizations, service organizations, governments, everything. Because if you think about it, lean applies to everything we do, but it's a very misunderstood concept.
Yeah, I've read the book, The Lean Startup, and I think the concepts apply the same way. You need to have that minimum viable product. You need to have the go-to-market strategy, whether it's organizational, leadership, startups, it doesn't matter. But it's kind of like having that minimalistic approach to anything you do, because I've heard this said, when you confuse, you lose. And it seems like if you're not focusing on lean concepts, it just gets cluttered, and then maybe that stalls progress. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Absolutely. We do a lot of strategy deployment for organizations. And one of the things that we discover when we're doing strategy deployment is that an organization, obviously growth is always a priority for most organizations. But when we start digging into their processes as we go through the strategy development, whether we're using Hodge and Connery or X Matrix, we realize that there's a lot of opportunities or a lot of obstacles that they're currently facing at their current size. And it's difficult sometimes to get people, to get organizations, leaders to understand that if you're struggling with processes and issues and opportunities when you're a $200 million organization, you jump to a $1 billion organization, those problems and opportunities just compound. In fact, they almost go exponential. It makes it even more difficult. I kind of like to use the analogy that, you could be driving a pickup truck, it holds a ton and a half of gravel, right? Or you could buy a semi that holds, 30 tons of gravel. But your processes are your fuel. So if your processes aren't effective and the processes aren't working, it doesn't really matter how much you're trying to haul, you're still going to be stuck on the side of the road. So you have to fix your processes. If you really want to grow effectively and have a market presence that's leaves a legacy, you have to have your processes working effectively. And that's really what lean is all about.
And so it's really foundational in the sense that you could have the most amazing output. Think of it like the cure for whatever, it doesn't matter. But if people don't know about it, or if you are not able to successfully deliver it to the market, it doesn't matter what your widget is, what your thing is. So I think that's a really big piece of it, whether it's your organization, your team, your processes to have something go through from start to finish to, input to output. I think too many people focus on that thing, that widget, and go, we have the best whatever. But if they have too much, influx, you can implode. I've heard it said, build your capacity in advance of demand.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. And when you start looking at your capacity and your demand and your processes, variability within a process, whether you're talking about a manufacturer, where you're talking about healthcare service, we've all called customer service for some company that we work with and had to call back. And it's like night and day. This person understood the processes, the system very well, very, very helpful. The next person had no clue what they were doing. So there's variability. Same thing. You buy a product, you go, wow, this is the greatest product I've ever bought. You buy another one, it doesn't work. It's 50% as reliable. And that variability within the process is the output, is really where the problems occur. And if you want to get people to come back to you every single time, if you want consistency in their loyalty, you have to build consistency into the output that you're providing to them, the value.
Yeah, that's a huge point, and I know it's easier said than done, of course. But so what do you find when you're working with organizations is the most common need that they're having for when they reach out to you to have you come in and work with their firm?
Really, I think it's understanding what they're trying to achieve. I do this whether I'm working with manufacturing or hospitals. I'll ask a group of people, and normally my first meeting is with the senior leaders in an organization, and I'll ask a simple question: what do your customers value? And it really doesn't matter what type of industry it is. I say, tell me what your customers value. And normally what happens is I'll get 5 or 6 answers, and then the room goes silent. And then I ask a question, and I tell them in advance, I'm stepping on your toes with this next question. Have you ever really made a list of what your customers value? And all of a sudden, people get this really dumbfounded look on their face like, wow, okay. And the reason I ask that question is very important, is if I've got 10 people in the room and I ask them all to make a list, every single list is going to be different. And what that tells me is that the people in the room, and some organizations are 10,000 people, 20,000 people, 100,000 people, so you can imagine the variation in the lists. But if I've got 10 people in the room and all of their lists are different, how can we say that we're being consistent in the value that we're providing if we've never made the list as an organization so that everybody's on the same page?
That's super, super huge. And what do you say when they look at you and say, we've not even begun that list, but we know the power of what that would be for us so that we can have consistency and start guiding our messaging to meet the same messaging on the list? What's the first place to start? What do you say to an organization to say, okay, the first step is?
The first step is to start with your senior leaders. You make the list. And then one of the most critical things, I think, for an organization to grow effectively, and when I say grow effectively to me means being able to sustain the growth and to be successful, not to just have more market share that you're going to lose because you can't sustain it, but to have effective market share that you can sustain. It starts with the leadership. It starts with the leadership understanding what the customers value, and then being humble enough to go to your directors, your managers, your supervisors, and your staff and have them make the lists as well, and realize that 90% of what your customers probably value, you didn't even have on your list, but your team members did. And it's an eye-opening experience. And in fact, it's probably one of the greatest experiences for senior leaders is to realize how knowledgeable and how in-depth their team members' understanding is about their customers and what they truly value. Because in all honesty, if you think about it, the people on the front line, the directors, the managers, the supervisors, those are the ones who are actually providing the value to the patients. They're the arms, the legs, the faces to our customers.
I'm going to describe a hypothetical situation, see if this has ever happened in what you're describing there. You're in the room with the senior VPs and leadership, and you're talking about the list, and they're like, okay, here's our pen and paper, or our, we're going to type up our things that we each feel are important to our customers, our clients, our valued people we serve. And time goes by, hour, let's say 25 minutes, and boom, let's go over a list, and they're high-fiving, going, these are great things. We need to focus on these. And then you go, okay, follow me down the hall. I've got your top customers in the conference room, and listen into what they are saying is important to them. And then they listen to that and look at their list, and listen to that, look in the list, and it's totally different.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's happened multiple times, and it's because when we're embedded within an organization, sometimes we lose that ability to look from outside the forest. We're surrounded by the trees of our operations. We don't see the big picture. And the interesting thing about value is value changes over time, but sometimes we're so embedded within the organization, we forget that the needs and that what people define as value changes on an ongoing basis. I talk about this in my book. And you've probably in the same situation. You probably have boxes in your attic full of old Disney VHS tapes. Well, I do, and I've got boxes in my attic of old DVDs because my cupboards near my TV and everything are filled with Blu-rays. But guess what? I don't even use the Blu-rays anymore because I stream everything now. So, when executives or when organizations look at value, they can't allow that to stagnate. They have to be probing. To your point, they have to be asking the people that are looking for that value, what do you value now? And it has to be something that's constantly being refreshed because the value that our customers require changes on an ongoing daily basis almost.
Yeah, that's a good point about VHS to DVD to Blu-ray to streaming. And this doesn't seem like it's been that many years, but things do change. So what I would wonder is, what do you recommend an organization use to discover that, what your customers value? Because the simplest way is go, oh, well, I'm just going to email out a quick survey and find out. And that may not be the best way to do it, because people just filling in the blanks, number one, getting them to do that is tougher, but just filling in the blanks a lot of times isn't the best way. You need to reach out, and if they're in town, take them to a coffee. If they're available by phone, talk on the phone and say, listen, you're one of our most loyal, longest term clients. Give us some insight. What was it that you were experiencing before, and what do you find that we provide? Is that something that you would recommend to do, or a mixture of all of that?
I'd say a mixture of all of it. In a hospital, we tend to make things difficult sometimes with all of the different organizations that gather data and the surveys and all that. But one of the easiest things that you can do, and whether it's a coffee shop, whether it's a hospital, a service organization. In fact, I was on a website this morning, and right after the chat, they had a box that says rate our service. And it was a survey, and I filled it out. It was 6 questions long, and I provided the feedback. Yeah. What's interesting is some of the best input you'll ever have takes place right during the interaction. So in a hospital, when you're checking someone out from the ED, how was your service today? Was there anything that we could have done better? How did we communicate? What could we do to do better for you next time you come in? Those simple questions serve a couple purposes. They validate to the person, to your customer, that you actually care about the service that you provide, but it also sends a message that we value your opinion. And, whether you're an employee for an organization or a customer to an organization, everybody wants to be valued. Everybody wants to see themselves as needed. So when we engage the customers and ask those questions, nobody understands what they value and what they want better than them. So why not just directly ask them?
Yeah, that's a huge, it sounds so obvious, but, and like you said, it takes a variety of those methods, because a large hospital organization or a mid-size tech firm or whatever, you're going to have a different way that you're going to communicate. Makes me wonder this. when an organization, if they were to say, hey, let's rate your own internal foundations and structures and operations, I'll bet you that they would rate themselves pretty good. But what is a trigger or a flag that's pretty common that an organization would go, that lean concept that Jay's talking about is pretty interesting. What is something that would be a trigger that they would go, maybe we should reach out and at least just chat with Jay and just see what they can do? Because I have a feeling that a lot of organizations think we're doing just fine. But when you come in with that outside perspective and say, hey, have you done, and what about this? They're like, there's huge opportunity.
So I think the biggest trigger, and every organization struggles with this, even Toyota, we dealt with this on a daily basis, but how we handled it was completely different than most organizations. I think the biggest trigger, the biggest indication that there's really an opportunity is just asking yourself a simple question. Have we fought this problem before? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, they have something pop up. Something goes wrong. They address it. And then they lose track of it. And 2 months later, the same problem pops up, and they just get into this vicious cycle of fighting the same thing over and over and over again, never truly addressing the problem. What they're actually addressing are the symptoms of the problem, but they never actually get to the root cause of the problem, and they never address it. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. And the interesting thing about problems is when you fight the same problem over and over and over again, it consumes your resources. And when it consumes your resources, those resources are either used to provide value to your customers, or they're used to throw in the trash can. You either use resources to add value, or you throw them into the trash can. You waste them. So when organizations struggle with the same process over and over and over again, what they're in essence doing is throwing their resources in the trash can. You could have high sales, you could have a great market share, but your EBITDA is just struggling. You can't figure out why. It's because it's been being covered up with workarounds, Band-Aids, sidestep processes, walls that we create. And the interesting thing about a lot of the problems and the workarounds that we find within our processes is that they weren't originally designed within the process. But over time, if people fight them long enough and they keep using the Band-Aids over and over again, those actually become the process. And we hire new people and we train them on a broken process.
That's it's really, really good point you bring up, because I was on a webinar just this past weekend where the speaker said, if I find myself doing the same thing more than twice in a month, I create a template and a process for it. You're saying if an organization is dealing with a problem and then they have to come back and deal with it again in whatever time frame, then there might be a chance that that's a problem that's not getting solved the right way. And key point being the right way, because you might think you solved it with this quick fix, but then it comes up again and then you do that same quick fix and it's never getting actually solved to the source of the problem. You're just putting a Band-Aid on it.
That's right. And like a Band-Aid, like a physical Band-Aid, the Band-Aid will fall off. It might be a month down the road. It might be 2 months down the road, but it's going to fall off. And you're going to have to use those same or the additional resources to get through the issue once again.
And that brings up a point that I was thinking of when you described that, called opportunity cost. So if you're devoting your resources to that Band-Aid solution, that's not the actual real long-term solution, the opportunity cost is kicking in, where you're diverting your attention from where it should be to grow, move forward, build, deepen your organization. And now you're dealing with this little thing that should have been fixed in the first place. So that you're the most valuable resource we have is time. And now you're diverting your time to deal with something you shouldn't be.
Right. And it's not just the time too. And what it becomes is it creates a culture. And every organization that I work with basically says this: we want to create a culture of engagement where everybody is facing the same direction, working towards the same objective. And when an organization doesn't actually fix the problems, they don't actually take the time to address the issues, they live with the Band-Aids and workarounds, what it does is it creates a culture of that accepts excuses, that accepts mediocrity. And after a while, people who have ideas about how to actually fix the problem, they stop raising their hand because they know it's not going to go anywhere, because the company has already said, we're okay with fighting these little issues on a daily basis. They're not that big of a deal. But the problem is, it's like walking through a Walmart parking lot. You could probably find 100 pennies in the Walmart parking lot. None of them have any value by themselves, but if you picked up every penny in every Walmart parking lot across the United States, I have a feeling that would be a pretty decent amount of money.
Yep, that's a good point. Hey, let's move over to your book, because I know that's been quite the labor of love. The Lean Treasure Chest: Using Lean to Locate, Recover, and Maximize Your Hidden Capacity and Potential. Give us a little bit of an overview of the book, because I understand it's about just like a pamphlet, like 10 pages or 12 pages, right?
Yeah, about 376 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was definitely a labor of love. One of the things that I've found through my career is that lean is misunderstood in a lot of ways. Lean, a lot of people believe that lean is about reducing headcount. It's not about reducing headcount. In fact, it's not even about waste. It's about value. Lean is about understanding what our customers value and then how to provide that value or maximize that value through our processes. And it talks about the origination, or how waste originates, how we use it. And one of the most important things it talks about is how to effectively lead a lean organization. It requires a new mindset. It requires you to never make excuses. It requires you as a leader to set the example, to walk the walk, talk the talk every single day, and to lead from the front, not from the ivory tower, the glass encased, I don't know what they call it, but it requires you to get down to the floor level where the people that add the value every single day exist. And it creates a loyalty. And it talks about, it goes through all of the different lean tools: SMED, value stream mapping, time studies, cycle time, all that good stuff. But lean is more about a mindset of understanding value than it is really about the tools. It's not just tools.
Yeah, I was watching an episode of The Profit where Marcus Lemonis talked about, hey, the definition of a CEO is not as much of a title as it is a mindset. It's the mindset of running an organization, and so that's a really, really good point. And then you brought up the ivory tower. It made me think of the old I want to say Tom Peters, but you'll probably know the quote, managed by walking around, not just pushing buttons, not just typing, and get on out there to the floor, the people, and manage by being visible and walking around and letting people know you're there, right?
Yep. I talk about it in my book. I had one of the greatest leadership lessons I've ever received was working with the CEO. And I drove in the parking lot one day, and I drove in behind him, and he was picking up trash as he walked in the building. And I was like, wow. And then the next day, went into the restroom. And as I was going into the restroom, he was wiping off the counter and then walking out. And I had a meeting with him the following day. And I said, you know what? I witnessed you doing these two things. This is not something that's common to most CEOs I work with. And he made a profound statement. He said, someone taught me years ago that if I ever become too important to do the things that I ask my employees to do, I cease to be their leader. And I was like, wow. Yeah, he's absolutely right. Absolutely.
That's just unbelievable. And I'm sure we could keep on for about 7.5 more hours, but let's wrap up with what's the best way that someone can reach out, connect with you, have maybe a conversation, and also pick up a copy of your book.
Absolutely. You can get a copy of the book on Amazon, through different websites. It's on Kindle. It will be available on Audible, I think the end of April. If you want to reach out to me, you can go to my company website. It's www.theletterJHODGEASSOC.com. And you can also reach me via email through that website. Or if you wanted to just chat with me, you can reach out to me on my company phone, 812-789-6404.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great chatting with you and talking with you, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Mike. You have a blessed day, all right?
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.